So, you have a question?
Is this on a file that's transmittable?
It is. You do not. Yeah, I make no commitment, but yes, it is. No, that's what I was saying. I want to record the audio and basically repackage this. It is currently out on a Dropbox drive, and I'd be happy to share it. But I want to embellish it even further. Telling family history is not something that we grew up with. We did not hear family history. Family history was basically a non-starter. One of the sequences that I think characterizes this so perfectly is there was a time at I guess it was a Christmas gathering. Betty and Nancy were sitting in the back of our parents' house in Tucson with my dad, and they were all, having some hot toddies or whatever, something, that eased the tension in the body. And they said, "So whatever happened to your father?" And he sat and quietly looked, and he's always smoked his non-camel or non-filtered Camels, and took a long draw of the thing and puffed it out and said, "He died." And this was the kind of history that we grew up with. The other half of it was my mother having fantasy about, well, he must have been some, a count or some sort of, royalty, and basically had this whole fantasy in her mind about who the ancestor was. And needless to say, a lot of it was inaccurate. So it was later in life, only around 2013 or so, that I actually said, "Dang it, I want to find out what's the story." So this is kind of how I got into doing this. I decided to get an account with Ancestry.com and get some information from Jillian or anybody else that had anything to share and begin my researches. So,
corpse, old limbs.
Yes. A corpse. So one of the things that I got from Jillian was a little collection, a PDF collection of a book that was assembled not by her, but was it by Carol? Anyway, and it had some photocopies of a variety of documents, some letters that were written by a gentleman named W.R. Finch, who we'll find out more about who that is. He's featured over here at this point on the tree. And this was a rendition of the genealogical table based on William Richard Finch. And we see it's organized by gender. Sons, 7 of them. Daughters, 3 of them. The last of which, his name is Another. So it's it's somewhat imprecise, but it was a start. And so we had some names, only portions of names: Jeffrey, Joseph, John, William. So it was something to go with. And that was my first exposure to this. While doing additional researches, I came across a fragment initially, just a little piece of a graphic that showed to the memory of Joseph Jeffrey Finch, and had barely those first 4 lines of it in this graphic. And I tried to find what this book was. I got a title of it, but it was not online. It wasn't available. It wasn't published. I sent off to the publisher. They said, "Oh, that's out of print. It's long gone." I later, about a year later, actually got a hold of a digital copy of the book and was able to find the true, full-fledged version of this page. And there's this one, and this is kind of my, what do they call it? Rosetta Stone, if you will, for the name. And then there was a similar page for it in Italian for the same gentleman. And here we finally, in our family, heard the name of the original ancestor, Giuseppe Goffredi DeFinis. This was earth-shattering as far as I was concerned. My mom had written a book, some of you may have seen, at the time of her 90th birthday, and she has this story, but it's a bit timeline incorrect, and the name was Riccardo. That sounds Italian, but Anyway, this is the true name, and this was in this an interesting book. The formal name of it, I think I had it written down here somewhere. But it's basically some guys that went around to different Catholic churches in northern India and transcribed the names and etchings that were on these different tombstones and headstones and plaques, tributes at various churches. This was at a church in Bankipur, which is in the Patna location. It is still there. Probably would be an interesting explore if somebody had the interest to go back to Patna and locate this Bankipur cemetery and locate this very plaque, which is on the outer wall, outer door of the location. I won't read it all. There is an interesting history in terms of the event here, the act of bravery that Joseph Jeffrey had, which basically was his moment of truth, that divining moment for him, where he was, as a result of his act of bravery, was given a gold medal, which we celebrated with our little coin that we had in Bra. I have more of them here. And a stipend or an annual stipend, and that's what helped him basically leave the service that he was in and then purchase a plantation in the Bihar region in Bengal. And that grew from there, became an established family, and they were indigo planters in northern India all the way up until 1947. So quite a legacy there. This also indicates that he was born in Sanfranc in Italy, which is, we went to go visit in Bra back in 2016. And that was a glorious trip. All of you who were here, how many of you were here in Bra? Yeah, that was magical, and we'll have to do that again or something similar. I know that the travel and the expense is great, but will you forget that? No. You know, it's an extraordinary thing that we were able to do, so we're very happy for that. In here, at the footnote of in here, is for a short account of the Finches in Terhut. See Minden Wilson's history. So this is one version of this book that we're talking about. I think it's actually my next picture here. So there it is. The history of Bihar indigo factories, reminiscences of Bihar, indigo and its inhabitants of the past, history of Bihar. So they're separate books with separate themes, but there's a lot of history of that region, apparently important enough for somebody to sit down and write and take down all of this. So if you haven't gotten a copy of this or, borrow one from somebody, it's surprising how many times Finch is mentioned in here. It's really a very prevalent part of it. But there are other plantation families as well. Something else that we got, when we were in Bra, and shortly before that, I encountered a cousin, actually a second cousin. Who here knows what a first cousin is? Okay, what makes a first cousin? What do they share to be a first cousin?
Parents or siblings. Parents or siblings.
Yes, so they all have the same grandfather. So their parents, but what makes them the same is they have the same grandfather. And a second cousin, anybody? Second cousin?
Different grandfather?
A different grandfather, yes. Same great-grandfather. So there was pictures out there of Richard Finch, who was our grandfather, and he had a brother named Joseph Walter Bernard Finch. And down the lineage from Joseph Walter Bernard, we encountered Jeremy Hawk. Those of you who were involved, we met Jeremy and Beth. And I had done actually a lot of correspondence by email with Jeremy's sister, helping do some of this discovery and research. But we encountered each other on an Italian genealogy website that I had posed the question, does anybody know how I can research Giuseppe Goffredo DeFinis? And this response came on there. It says, I think we're related. And lo and behold, we were. So we met Jeremy, and one of the things that he contributed that I thought was pretty remarkable was he and his wife had gone they were actually in Saluzzo where they were staying, but they went to Sanfranc and to the same church and met with the parish priest there and was able to get a copy of this baptismal. So this is the baptismal that Giuseppe Goffredo DeFinis received, that was documented at the time he was baptized, and was later given to him at the age of 12 when he left Italy. We don't know all the circumstances of that, but a 12-year-old boy being given your baptismal, I guess that's your walking papers, and finding his way, there's basically no record or history of what happened until he shows up in India at the Battle of Sholingor. And that was the difference between 12 and, say, 24. This is, I embellished it a bit with the scroll, but this is the transliteration of this baptismal certificate. So we can see when he was born, September 12th, 1755, that this baptism happened the next day. Who his parents were, Simon Geoffridus and Constantia DeFinis. And you'll see that Simon and Constantia are names that show up many generations down. It's a recurring theme in here. Isn't that right, Jennifer? Jennifer Simone. Anyway, and then the godparents, also from the same area in Revelli, is where it was. So this was given to him at the age of 12, and off he goes. The next thing we know, he's in the military. It's not true military. It's kind of a private police force or private military for the East India Company, the most honorable company, as it was called. And they were...
Human rights would be
yeah. Well, I won't go into the right or wrong of that. It is what it is. But he set out to make his way. So here we are. We're finally getting to the tree. Giuseppe Goffredo DeFinis, born September 12th, 1755. And there's the godparents. Or excuse me, the parents. And I have no clue about their birthday or, even year or anything. So I don't even pretend to throw something up there. But they were obviously older than he was. In this book, the histories of Bihar and such, there's a discussion or a mention of a Frenchman named Dombasle Doublé, who was apparently a persona non grata in that area. The British governor of the region did not like the way he treated his plantation workers. They didn't appreciate him. He was French. Whatever reason, they decided that he was going to be basically banished from the country. He was told to go to Calcutta and prepare to leave, and basically he's ejected from the country, and we don't know anything more about him. He had a wife and a daughter, Rosa d'Abreu Doublé. The d'Abreu name we get from some other history writings that we've found. D'Abreu is actually a Portuguese name. She remained behind, and not sure what the circumstances were, but Rosa and Joseph Jeffrey, he got anglicized to Joseph Jeffrey, end up married, quote unquote. I put quotes on the marriage because it becomes a topic of hot debate in later years in terms of the legitimacy of the offspring and whether or not they're able to inherit. But there they are, Rosa d'Abreu and Joseph Jeffrey Finch. They are the beginning of our tree. Okay. And married or not, they had kids. They had a lot of them. And the firstborn, even though she was, the original tree that I saw had them grouped by gender. Firstborn and the oldest was Constantia Christina. And she lived with them. I don't know that she actually married, but lived with them for a long time and was actually executor of the will at the time that Joseph Jeffrey passed eventually. Jeffrey Joseph. This is a recurring theme. Yes. Jeffrey Joseph was the oldest born son. Let's see, I've got a few notes on him. The father died, Joseph Jeffrey died in 1815. You see the year up there. And Jeffrey Joseph took over the plantation. Now, these names of the plantations, some of them are different names for the same location. Some of them are different locations. They ultimately had I think, 4 unique plantation areas around the area. This particular one was Chapor Ondi, which is one of the ones that was longest in the family. I wish I could do something for the temperature for you, but I will just try to move through this. It's warm. All right. He did die from an illness many years later. He was traveling. He did die in 1851. So he had gone off on a journey with his sister Matilda. We'll see her in a moment. And Matilda had a nephew that she had basically raised. And there's more on that story. So 3 of them were traveling around Europe, and rather than enjoying the trip, he actually fell very ill and died in that trip. And Matilda remained in England after that. Born December 25th is John Christmas. Wonder where he got his name. Also died at a young age of 33, unknown circumstance. Joseph Simon Peter, 1800 to 1857. We do have a lot of Josephs. We have a lot of Jeffreys. And a few Simons here and there, yes. So Joseph Simon Peter, we will see in more detail. He's one of the 2 children that actually had offspring of this row of children. Simon Francis. Another one who died, I think, at a young age, of age 50, died in Calcutta. He was one who helped grow a new plantation. A lot of these plantations would have a certain amount of work going, and there would be a distant factory, and then that would turn into yet another plantation, a new plantation. So this one started a plantation called Bubnowley. Don't know much about it. And then he along with his brother, Joseph Simon Peter, did the funding to build a particular church in that area, a Catholic church in that area. And that's where they were buried when he died. Another girl, is it coming along here?
Are these all indigo plantations?
These are all indigo plantations, yes. They did dabble with a few other crops, most notably sugar. There's even an interesting story of them entering some apples that they grew there into a contest back in England. And these apples were extraordinary of size and quality, but they were apparently a few days late getting into the contest, so they didn't win or didn't qualify. But they were able to grow. This was a very, very fertile area. They could grow all kinds of things. But indigo was the money crop of the day until the late 18th century, when the Germans came up with a synthetic indigo. And that basically killed the indigo market. Who else have we got here? William Jeffrey. All I know about him is he died of smallpox, also at Bubnowley. There's Elizabeth Philomena. Okay, this one introduces an interesting story. Elizabeth Philomena, we know from the history that we read, she was a widow, so apparently married at some point, but don't know of any offspring or any children. Don't know who she married, but whoever he was, she was a widow. So he died too. Anyway, but she and her oldest sister, Constantia Christina, entered a convent in Loreto, the Loreto convent at Enteley, Calcutta. They entered a convent in 1842, a few months apart, and they brought with them, each of them brought a lakh, L-A-K-H. This is an Indian word. Anybody know what a lakh is? 100,000 rupees. So we're talking 1842, 100,000 rupees. It's a lot of money. And they each brought their own bundle and gave it to the church there to build the convent that they had. Interestingly, this convent later in 1931 to 1948 was where Mother Teresa was living and growing in her ministry that she had. Okay. Matilda. This is one of the few out here that has one name. Matilda. And she never married, but she ended up, her her brother Frederick, who we haven't met yet, her brother Frederick had a son with his first marriage, and the wife died in the first marriage, so she basically raised the son, Joseph Burnett. And that was the travel companion, Matilda and Joseph Burnett, this nephew, and Jeffrey Joseph, who were all traveling when Jeffrey died. This particular page has a lot of notes on it because there's a lot of people here. All right. And then Frederick, another one with only one name that we know of. Nothing else was written down for him. And this is also the only other of the sons that had additional progeny afterwards. So Joseph, Simon, Peter, and Frederick, this is where the rest of the family comes from. I won't say more about him. Justin, the youngest, he is the one who ultimately, until he died, was running all of the plantations. Became the main man running everything. And then when he died, there was a lot of contest about the will, about who it should go to. Does it go to the oldest brother? Does it go to the brother who cares? There was a lot of debate and a lot of legal mumbo-jumbo that went on for years after that. He also has his own chapter in this book, Justin Finch does. So he's an interesting character. This really could be a great movie or Danielle Steele's story or something. It's got so many dimensions to it. So I thought it might be intriguing, and we'll see how intriguing it is, to basically light up some of the things going on in this part of the world at these same time frames. You know, in this early 1791, what was going on? The Bill of Rights was being established. Cotton gin was invented. George Washington, the first president and father of our country, died in 1799. So that's right at the time that they're starting up this plantation and starting to have children. Louisiana Purchase happened in 1803. The War of 1812. So all of these, this is just to give you a context. Any of you who are taking, history classes, a lot of times you're not going to learn about what's going on in India or even in England or Italy. This is what's happening in these same time frames here in our country. So it gives you some perspective on, how far back are we talking? It's a long way back. So again, 2 kids that had children. Joseph Simon Peter Finch married Isabella Nicholson. Now, this is an interesting one. That when I first got the histories, the handwritten histories that I got from the Hawks, Jeremy Hawk, they wanted me to not get too, divulge too much information in it because this was considered sensitive. But Isabella Nicholson, point blank, was half Indian. Her father was John Nicholson, Richardson Nicholson, and he married the daughter of Umrao Singh, who remained with the family as a beloved grandfather figure with the family for a number of years. So there is a strong Indian connection at that point in the family. What this means for me, my siblings, etc., is we are 1/32 Indian.
Is Nicholson the general or one of the generals in one of the Indian wars or not?
Yes. I don't know if we can take that divergence, but yes. I don't think Richardson Nicholson is. It's the father, John Nicholson. But this is an area that Mark Payne has done a lot of research in.
John Nicholson was a general. She was either his sister or his niece. John Nicholson never married, had no children, but he at one point was the commander-in-chief of East India Company forces in India. That's why the Nicholson name is so important.
Yes.
Especially during the Second Sikh Wars of 1848-49. Nicholson was in charge of that when the Sikhs were defeated, and as a result they were brought into the East India Company out of the respect that the British had for them for being such great warriors, which is sort of continued on today. I think a lot of the Sikh community are treated as a martial race, or they were certainly at that point in time. So that's the Nicholson thing.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, on with the kids. William Richardson. So we saw in that initial flowchart of the family genealogical tree, WRF. This is William Richardson Finch. And the Richardson name comes from the father. Also, John Joseph Simon. He attended seminary, went to the college at St. Gregory, served as a Catholic priest until he died at the age of 71. You'll see, I think, two major themes that show up, well, maybe three, if you will. Military prowess. There are people who end up in military service and have acts of heroism and acts of bravery. We have a lot of priests or clergy or nuns, people who are devout in their faith. And we have a lot of entrepreneurial people who are excellent at, managing the financial side of the plantation and growing the business and doing all that. So it's really a really great legacy to have and try to emulate or embrace. Jeffrey Justin. He lived with his grandfather, Robert Parkinson Brooke. And there's a connection with the Brooke family that goes with a couple of generations here. But again, he was a priest, parish priest in India, serving with the church there. Jeffrey Justin was the owner of Shapur Ondi, that same plantation again, until he died at 36 from an aneurysm. 36 is young. And then we also, William Richardson Finch married and had children with Mary Hannah Augusta Carshore. Somewhere along the line, we find a book of songs and poems written by Mary Hannah Augusta Carshore. I've got a copy of that somewhere, or at least a picture of it. And it's just an interesting piece. She was a creative person. So first off, they have Kenneth Joseph Benedict and Robert Jeffrey Dominic. They were twins. And they died very young. Robert died at 3 months. Kenneth died at 13 months. It's a tough way to start a family, but can't keep a good man down. William Richard Francis is the name that I have, and I found this in the history, the handwritten histories that we got from his sister. But it's also located or defined in some legal documents as Richard Marivelle Finch. So there's a little confusion on the exact name. For right now, this is what I have in print until we get that more resolved. This is my grandfather. So those of us who are direct children of Bill, Walter, Babs, Jack, the whole crew. Who? Richard, yes, of course. This is Grandpa, William Richard Francis, or possibly Richard Marivelle. Not too sure why we have confusion about names, but it is. Mary Teresa Pauline is the person who initially did the writing in history in a little notebook of all of these genealogies and such. And that's one of the resources that I got copies of from the Hawks, her handwritten notebook that was then rewritten by his mother, Canis, or that was his aunt, rather, Canis. And they embellished with a few more stories of their lineage on the Walter Bernard side and other journeys that Mary Teresa had no knowledge of. So she was a chronicler. Very, very thankful that she did this. Interesting note, the day she was getting married, her father, William Richardson Finch, who was a solicitor, he had a lot of the information that we got from Jillian was a collection of letters that he was writing back and forth in his capacity as solicitor, defending the right to inherit, defending the fact that Giuseppe, Joseph, Jeffrey, and Rosa were indeed married, but the English government didn't recognize that marriage because it didn't happen with their church. It happened by a Catholic priest or something somewhere else, and England being largely Protestant didn't recognize it. So they said, no, your children can't inherit. They're all bastards. Anyway, that was a long legal battle, and there was a determination made at that point that, this is somewhat my conjecture, but that he got notice of something, the outcome of some legal event, and basically had palpitations and died on the day of her wedding. So My conjecture is that he found out we're losing everything, that the property was not going to, they couldn't hang on to it. This is another short-lived contribution. Hermione Catherine Gertrude was buried in the garden at Shapur-Ondi. She was only 18 months when she died. I imagine, just from a health perspective, living in these conditions would have been difficult for child rearing. Not to mention the ones that die at the age of 30 or 40. Lots of infant deaths here in less than 2 years, or even less than 6 months. Simon John Constant. All I know about him is he died in 48 in Calcutta of diabetes and heart failure. Maud Antonia Constance is another one that died at 6 months. But, they're recorded. They're considered. And then Joseph Walter Bernard. So this is the grandfather for Jeremy Hawk that we met in Bra. And there is a story. So he is a brother to William Richard Francis, so he would be our great uncle. Those of us that's our grandfather, this is a great uncle. He died in a polo accident. He was an avid polo player and was in a match, and something went haywire. He got hit on the head, fell off the horse, and died from those injuries a few days later. There is another story. I think I'll forego getting into it at this point. It's warm, and we're going to try and get through this. But there are lots of stories on a lot of these threads, and it's a fascinating thing. We just got to figure out the right format to go through them in a way people can digest. One of the connections that we made along the way, Mary Teresa Pauline married John Turnbull McIntyre. And the McIntyre line, one of the children, a woman married into a Sherman family. And we encountered a gentleman named Ian Sherman, who is a avant-garde artist in England. He has his own website. Go there if you dare. It's very strange. But he hosted a bunch of materials that he got from their archives. And one of them was this portrait. This is Isabella Nicholson. So she is the half-Indian daughter of Richardson Nicholson and the native daughter of Singh. We don't know what her name was. Umrao Singh's daughter. So it's an extraordinary picture. I just thought that was an interesting thing to see. And, yes, the arrow. William Richard Francis is one who had children. Mary Teresa Pauline had children, and Joseph Walter Bernard also had children. And there we go. A sibling, so we haven't left that first generation yet. A sibling there was Frederick Finch. So remember we had Joseph Simon Peter, that we've just been traveling down through there, and he had a brother, Frederick, who also had children. So we're back up to that generation. He married Barbara Burnett. And in their marriage, they had one child, Joseph Burnett, and Barbara died during childbirth. So they weren't together very long, and this was apparently a difficult time for Frederick. His sister Matilda ended up raising Frederick. And rather than do that, he went off and married Jane Caroline Cephis Roquet. The name we may learn later. There's another name or something here, but this is the best that I've gotten out of the materials that I've been reading. So she is a French woman, and they married and had one child, Frederick Camille Emmanuel. But we'll see more about that generation in a bit. Joseph Burnett, the son, married Ellen Jackson, and I don't know. I know what her birth year was, but no history of what happened with her when they died. Justin Joseph was their offspring. Justin Joseph was the last known person in the family tree to actually have the physical medal that Joseph Jeffrey was awarded at the time that he was given one. He had moved back to the UK where he lived out his days, and Mark has valiantly tried to track it down, and it's apparently gone off into oblivion somewhere in the demise of a particular museum that was holding it. It's a sad story, Mark. But anyway, we made our own. We're happy about that. I am. Then another child, John Alfred. What can I say about John Alfred? Died at the young age of 10 in Marylebone. Some of these towns in England, I don't know whether they're significant or not, but they was listed as born in London and died in Marylebone. It's like a suburb or something? Okay. All right, okay. Louisa Mary, also born in London, lived there and in Middlesex, and died in Warwickshire at the age of 67. So a lot of the family did move back to the UK and continue to live out their days there in various locations there. An interesting diversion, Edward Joseph was born in the Guernsey Channel Islands, lived in London and Middlesex, and eventually went back to India and died in Kannur, which is in Tamil Nadu, at the age of 80. So that's kind of a reverse there. But there's a connection that goes on there from the Guernsey Islands. There's a little chunk of family that ended up living in Guernsey. Ellen Mary, also known as Nellie. We'll see Nellie in a moment in a picture. This is another picture we got from Ian Sherman. And Alice Mary. The young lady died of tuberculosis at the age of 15. And then Bernard William also died at age 25, but he had moved to New Zealand. Family gets around. So this is another picture that I got from Ian Sherman. I do wish we'll be able to track down a sharper, clearer version of it, but I've done the best I can with a little Photoshop to try and bring it out. But if the detail's not there, the detail's not there. I'm not expert enough with Photoshop to make people up.
Look at that mustache. Doesn't that look like a
Yep, the mutton chops are there. So we've got the names along here. Tick Finch is the lady on the end here is Maria Teresa Pauline, who married into the McIntyre family. She's the one who journaled the history in the 40s. Justin Finch, that's the nephew or the son who ended up with the medal. That was the last holder of the medal. Allie Finch, the young lady who died of tuberculosis, probably not long after this photo was taken. In the back is Uncle Joe. That's Joseph Barnett, who was the firstborn that died, or that at his birth his mother died, and was raised by Matilda, his aunt. Walter Carshore, W.R.F. Finch, married the Carshore family. Walter Carshore was a brother-in-law for them, but they were all hanging out together. Here on the floor is Rick Finch. This is Richard Merivale, or William Richard Francis Finch, our grandfather. And as far as I know, for everybody that's in the room that's here this weekend, we all share this grandfather. Does anybody think they go in a different direction? We all share him as a grandfather. So, Rick Finch, this guy. I don't know the dog, but there was no note on him. And then Nellie was the other Elizabeth that we saw in that most recent family tree there. So this is an interesting photo. Don't know where this is. Don't know anything about it other than the names of the people that were listed there.
It looks like one of the first kinds of pictures we were able to take. At that time, cameras were just a bit.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Look. What? This is like a Ramada outside. I don't think they had 2-story places there.
That square herringbone thing at the very top of the image, that's the substrate.
Okay.
Probably a tiled roof. They're on probably the second floor because they put a curtain over it for whatever reason, and then they took the photograph.
All right. Thank you. We'll leave that with the engineering minds to conjecture on further. Okay, moving on with Frederick. A second marriage to the Jane Caroline Safis, and they had the one son, Frederick Camille Emmanuel, who also married into the French family, and Louise Anne-Marie Lafond. And this is where we discovered a connection to the Lafond, Chateau Lafond winery, which I had suggested would be a good destination for but we may have to let them know we're coming. It might not, But anyway, and I don't know if this is something that you can get, Al, in this country, if it's only. So we'll have to we'll make you an assignment of that. So, all right. Canop Fronsac, yeah. So this is a Bordeaux wine. France is obviously, they make lots of wines, but Bordeaux is probably one of the most notorious or infamous or famous, however you want to look at it.
3,000 years.
Yeah. Okay. More children. Marie-Louise Ninon, Marie-Madeleine, we know when they were born, don't know anything more about them. At this point, the records are over in Bordeaux in France. Ancestry.com doesn't really go to France much. I don't know if they're just not sharing or if they didn't document or what was going on, but very little information about them. And then we have Jean Frederick, and we do know about him because he served in the military. And there's a note in the history that was being written that said he was a lieutenant of Spahi, which was a very peculiar term I'd never heard before. So we looked it up, and it's basically like the French cavalry, particular unit of the French cavalry. So it's kind of like French Foreign Legion, but in a different venue. And he ended up in some French conflict in Syria and died in battle in Syria. So as I said, there's quite a few military, heroic, brave people in our history here. And 1920. So 1920. This is after World War I. There was still skirmishes going on of some description, trying to settle the boundaries and borders in the Middle East. Well, it's the Middle East. What can you say? Very troublesome area. The wine bottle, I guess it's still there. And then Mary Emanuel, yet another daughter. Again, very little that we know about this particular branch, but died in Bordeaux. Most of them just lived and died in Bordeaux. MTP, Mary Teresa Pauline, Mrs. John Turnbull McIntyre. She's the author of the histories, and this is why she's a significant person within our story, because she's the one who helped us pick it up and understand what it is and keep going with it. I had some other materials prepared. I won't show them, but I'll make them available online. Ian Sherman, with his collection, also had some closer to original handwritten notes by Mary Teresa Pauline. They're really messy, so I appreciate the work that Canis did to clean them up and rewrite them and make them more simple to read. I don't know what situation she was in, but they're writing in these little, like a bullet journal. Anybody do bullet journals today? It's apparently a popular thing, but they're just small little notebooks with a little rubber band on them. You open up, write down what you want, draw a map, draw pictures, draw birds, whatever.
Indiana Jones had one of those.
Exactly. So a little thing like that is where all this history is captured in, and we've got some scans of that on Ian Sherman's materials, and then a rewrite of that. So this is kind of what that looked like. So if you can imagine, this is like maybe 7 inches across and 4.5 inches tall, writing all these notes about what's been going on here. So here's Giuseppe Goffredi DeFinis, born in the parish of San Francisco, Piemonte, Italy. So she's translating the baptismal certificate there. And then starting to give the genealogies. More kids. Henry Finch McIntyre. Henry Finch McIntyre was a military man. He was trained at Quetta, which is in the north of India. It's actually, is that in Pakistan now, Quetta? Does that ring a bell? I think that's actually in Pakistan now. Yeah, it's in the what do they call it? The Kashmir. So it was a military school for them up there. Served in World War I, served in World War II, and eventually passed in 1958, living in South Africa. I have a little one story that I had sent out to all of us that were in the Ancestry distribution back then, and I've got a collection of those I'll make available. Janice, no details known, but she died in 1977 and was living in Bangalore. Mary Carshore McIntyre married Frederick Sherman. So this is the connection that goes off to where Ian Sherman's line of the family came in. Married in 1926, and Ian is the one who's contributed a lot of the imagery that we've been borrowing from. Helen Turnbull McIntyre, don't know anything about her, but she died at 82, so she did something good. Was born in India and died in England. And then John Frank Finch McIntyre, born in Bombay, married Elspeth Drummond, and had 4 children and ultimately died in Scotland. This is an edition that I did over where we went in Bra, because when we were done, there was quite a few astonished faces of the younger generation going, who? What? Where do I fit? Where do I connect? So I thought it was important to get this generation in so we would know. So this is my grandfather. Everybody in the room, who's that? This is your grandfather. Who, all of you? So there you are. There's Grandpa. And Millicent Clarissa Bennett, his mums. There's a whole interesting story, again, more Danielle Steele, with her running off with the oil man, the wildcatter, and the effect that had on the family. And
Do you have any record of when that happened?
Yes. Yeah. No, it's a good leading question. But they had a number of children, these two, and we're going to see who those children are. So that's, Avis is the first of them. And we just recently, through Donna and her daughter's research, just found more information about Avis just in the last couple of months. But yes, this marriage went on, and in, let's call it 1925, she has children with the wildcatter, twins, one of which dies very young, part of the pattern, and the other, Johnny, actually went back to the States with her. So she moves with the wildcatter back to the U.S. and goes to Montana where the oil wells are, and he's making money in the oil wells. And one by one, Bill and Richard follow along at different times. And so we're talking in the late 20s, early 30s, that they're meeting up in Montana, basically near Butte, Montana. That's a whole nother story. Okay, so we did learn, as I said, Donna and her daughter, Lorena, are also doing some voracious ancestry research work and such. And Lorena just, maybe 3 months ago, showed me this record she found of Avis being married. Because in the notes that we had, it just said she died. And all we know about her is she played piano beautifully, which is a nice legacy. But we didn't know more about it. But she ended up, has married someone named Clarence Joseph Chatter in 1924, but no further records after that.
She says it died in 23.
When I was a little girl and Carol was just a couple years older, grandmother Finch, whose name was, we just called her Grandma O'Day because that was the name she had at that point. But she was very active in our lives, and her son Johnny was active. He was a pill. I mean, he was a very spoiled boy. But anyway, was great. She made us pies and cooked curries for us, and was a very nice grandma for a few years, and then she passed away. But, anyway, she was very much alive and passed away. She was alive when I was in 5th grade, and
Yeah, 1947 for Millicent. We show her as passing, 1947, I think in Long Beach at that point. They were down there.
But she was alive and well for a few years, and we did, as a family, get a chance to be with her.
Okay, but Avis, her daughter, firstborn daughter, did you know more or different about her?
No.
Okay. That's what I thought you were showing me. Avis, all right. Number 2 tries harder. So the recent record we found was that rather than showing that she died at 18 or so, is that she married in 1924. Avis did. And I've seen it spelled with an S or with a CE. I like the S spelling, even though it does seem like a car rental. Richard Walter Melville. Our original story, even as far as recently as in Bra in 2016, we were going through this. The story we heard was he died in World War II. And we're very happy to know he did not. So that's wonderful. Now this is what I have for his name. That's correct. Thank you. As I said, there was some debate on William Richard Francis Finch, whether it was that or it's Richard Merivale Finch. And there's reason to believe it could be either one.
Melville's, because it makes sense that he would have taken, instead of the Merivales, it must have transcribed as Melville and taken.
So you think Merivale is legitimately there for there. Now, Mary Teresa Pauline's notes, Canis Notes, is where I got that name from. So we have to pick somebody to believe here. But anyway, it's not an exact science by any stretch. So how many have heard, I mean, I sent notes out, but I'll take just 1 minute here to recount that Walter was in the British military and was in Singapore at the time that the Japanese invasion was coming down. So if anybody here see the movie Dunkirk? So there's this massive evacuation of a completely outclassed, outmanned military force, and they're trying to get them out. Singapore, with the onslaught of the Japanese forces, was a very similar situation. And there were forces from England and Australia and India, all there trying to defend this, and the leadership says, we can't do this. So they surrendered. And they were all captured, hundreds of thousands of troops captured this was February 1943. The fall of Singapore. And so Walter was among those that were captured, and they were force-marched up the Malay Peninsula into various places around there. Mind picture, bridge on the River Kwai, Japanese prison camp, building a bridge for the railway. So there were camps like this all up and down that railway, and he was in Burma, today called Myanmar, but at the time Burma, working in one of the prison camps on this railway. It was called a death railway because the prisoners were treated. The Japanese did not consider the Geneva Convention anything that they needed to worry about. They had their goals, they had their missions, and slave labor from prisoners was the right way to do things for them. I don't know the circumstance, but miraculously Walter escapes from the prison camp. Do you know how long he was in the prison camp?
Not sure, but my mother did say that he did work on the railway and was treated extremely badly. It was
Sure.
very, very hard. He escaped with, there were 4 of them who escaped and then went through the jungles of Burma. So they were out for a long time. One of them died on the way, and then they finally got to India.
Right.
By foot, so that must have been taken
A long time. So they weren't going across by waterway. They went northways through what's now Bangladesh or whatever. Yeah. And naturally, this is 1940, let's call it 1944, being generous with how long he might have survived in the prison camp, and getting back to India. So at that point, the family is long gone. He goes to the family location in Bihar, where the Shapur Ondi, or where the family holdings were. There's nobody there. There's probably not even a working farm or factory or anything anymore. He hears tell that his brother is in Bombay. He travels to Bombay trying to find him. I imagine it's difficult to find somebody in Bombay if you don't know where they are. It's a big place. But needless to say, he does not find him and ultimately moves. I don't know if it was at that point, but ends up in Panchgani.
No, he stayed in Bombay.
Stayed in Bombay.
Where he met my mother.
Okay, they met there.
And he only moved up to Panchgani in about 1960.
Okay, thank you. 1960. But at that point is separated from the rest of the family, and I don't think you know much about what was going on with the rest of the family or how that connection was being made.
Army records, he knew his mother had moved to Montana because with the Army records they had next of kin, which did say, Millicent Clarissa Bennett is where I got the name from. And they did have a P.O. box number in Dillon, Montana. That was all he had, but beyond that, there wasn't anything else. So,
Right.
So I guess he knew that the mother had left to go on the state.
And
There was an uncle who was a Jeffrey Simon Finch, who actually was running part of the estate, who had 2 daughters, and who knows who he was.
I think we saw him in here somewhere.
And
Jeffrey Simon sounds familiar. So
there was the connection there where, he did ask my father to come back and help with the estate, but my father didn't want to go because he said they were too Catholic.
yeah.
They were priests, he said.
Yes, it's a strongly Catholic roots in this family. Be that as it may. Okay, so we've got lots more to learn about Walter and his journey, but we will continue. Next born was William Charles Edward, and this the English have a peculiar way of doing first and middle names, and what do they go by, and which is actually their first name or which is actually their middle name. This is what I've settled on, William Charles Edward. This is our Uncle Bill. Relations to Bill in the room? We've got some. There you go. You have a comment.
My dad was William Charles Finch, but I never heard.
You never heard the Edward.
No.
Okay, we've seen it in print in some of the legal documents, like the baptismal stuff, but it's one too many names. So,
No. When was this? 1907. Yeah.
yes. That's Bill.
That's our bill.
That's your Bill. Okay. Another one with one name, Richard. He often joked that he says it's either no middle name or my name is Mustard. But, yeah. Yeah. There weren't many. Frederick was one with one name. Matilda was one with one name. But not many in this. So there's Richard. 1909 to 1985. Let me back up one. Who in the room is descended from Richard? There you go. So, and one of my goals here is that when I was growing up, there was no family history, no story, no nothing. And I encourage you, whoever feels connected with this, to pick up on it and continue it, because it's an interesting family and it's an interesting legacy. Yes, sorry. I'm on the last stretch here. All right. Teresa, Agnes, Barbara, Maud, and I've had debate with people about whether Maud was part of it or not. I believe it is. Teresa, Agnes, Barbara, Maud. This is Babs. Connections to Babs in the room? You were connected to Babs?
I met her.
You met her? Yes, she was your aunt.
But you're asking who's...
But direct descendant, I believe Mark Payne is the only one in the room who's a direct descendant.
She was my grandmother.
Yeah.
Yes. And I'll have a story about her in a minute.
Yeah, and I'll give up the floor in a minute. All right, John Jeffrey. That's the reason we're all here. Children or descendants of John Jeffrey. I was expecting a lot more hands to go up. They all left. It's too hot in here. This is more like Dallas weather. Okay. And finally, Grace Mary, also known as Boodles. And we have the one and only picture I'm aware of that I hadn't seen until today of of Grace Mary out there in the foyer.
For her as well.
All right, so you can vouch for her.
Big story.
Born 1915. I do not know her demise.
I do have that.
Okay,
Yeah, she
that'll
died
be
in India.
okay. And Teresa Agnes is basically responsible for a number of different family lines. The Paynes and the Pattersons was part of her marriage and children. And then on the other side of Richard was Joseph Walter Bernard, married Mary Elizabeth Marcoulin. She's Irish descent. And they had these children, Margaret Mary Concilio and Canis Mary Philomena. She's the lady who was rewriting or retranscribing the Mary Teresa notes. And Pamela Mary. Pamela Mary is... We started to meet David Grimes. He was going to go out to Bra to meet us, but he lives in South Carolina. And David Grimes is related to Pamela Mary. So that's his cousins and such on the Hawks side. This is where the Hawks enter into the family. Margaret Mary Concilio married Neville Arthur Joseph Hawke. They were in Kannur, India, and left there and went to Australia. So that's how they made the connection into Australia. Canis married Constant. He moved to Canada. They lived in Vancouver. It's the other side of Canada. And Pamela Mary married Francis Edward Guy Grimes, and they lived in North Carolina and South Carolina both, I think. Or no, New Jersey and South Carolina. If anybody has a clearer, sharper picture of this or version of this, please let me know. This is the best I got off of Cluster. But this is our illustrious gang in behind the hotel in Bra. And we'll have to find an opportunity before we all go away to get another such candid shot for us. We'll do it while the light is good. But this was a spectacular time. I was very, very happy that people made the journey, made the effort to get over there, much as I am this time. I know some of you had a long way to go. Some of you, are, even if you're on the other side of the sound, you have a long way to go. But, you know, I just encourage you to enjoy that we have a very rich family history with a lot of interesting characters throughout, and probably see yourself in some of these characters. And maybe get a little understanding of why you do the things you do. But there we are, July 2016 in Bra, Cuneo, Piemonte. So, yes, I think we've had enough. I'm sorry. I know you've all had enough. Between the room and the length of the story, it is, how many generations did we go? That's a lot of generations. But what we can do then, I think it may work, is we'll break for our cocktails and get out of the hot room, get refreshed. We'll adjourn to dinner, and those of you who have prepared comments to represent your limb of the tree, perhaps we can do that during the dinner. Does that work? Okay. So thank you all for your attention. Thank you.